Good to go. All right, well, a very good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jesse Davidson. I'm the chair of the auctioneers chapter here at the REI in New South Wales. I'm joined today by Mr. Clarence White on my left-hand side from Bressick Whitney, a very, very accomplished auctioneer. Clarence has been working with Bressick for a good period of time. Started his career off with McGrath, but importantly, moved back up here to Sydney, did some incredible things last year, importantly in relation to the competition sphere. He's a two-time state champion and importantly represented us beautifully at the Australasians last year. I own and operate my own auction business, Auction Works, out of the CBD here in Sydney. We do about 2,500 to 3,000 auctions a year, and the two of us, between us, will be your presenters for today. So thank you for joining us. Much like normal, we're going to keep it pretty relaxed. If you've got any questions throughout the training today, please feel free to throw those questions at us. We do ask to try and keep those questions to the end of each stanza. Today's course, of course, is about Auction 4 conversations with equal success, but mainly talking about Auction 4 dialogue. I think probably, Clarence, we get asked more questions about Auction 4 dialogue than anything, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah. That'd be the number one thing, I'd say.
Yeah, and look, the reason for it is pretty obvious. People want to learn how to negotiate to the best of their capacity, and importantly, negotiate in a way whereby their owners are getting a better result, and of course the buyers are walking away from the auction not necessarily feeling that they were pressured, but felt that they were guided through a process, which is always going to be difficult for anybody. So we might as well get straight into things today if we can. So what we're going to do is try and run this in a bit of a logical way to run it. So we've got the pre-auction conversation is the first thing that we're going to be discussing. Now, the pre-auction conversation can be held in three sort of stanzas. It's got to be held with a vendor, it's got to be held with your buyers, and importantly, it's got to be held with your agent as well. Now, we will get to the agent side of things, the agent auctioneer side of things in a few moments, but have a chat to us today, Clarence, a little bit about some of the things that a buyer or an agent needs to discuss with their buyers prior to the auction day, or even on auction day as they arrive.
Yeah, okay. We'll briefing the buyer first up. You know what's going to happen if they've never bid before, the registration process and what's going to happen. But I think the really important things to sort of skip through the basic stuff are price conversations, and I think organising a starter is something that's really important as well. And in the current conditions, I guess, with the market changing a little bit, if you've got one bidder or one strong bidder and a potentially non-bidder or a soft bidder, having some conversations around the potential for that bidder to increase their bid on top of themselves and the need to do that and why they should do that if that situation arises. So I think pre-framing those conversations and getting them done before the auction puts you in a much better position to get a result from them once you actually have to have the conversation on the auction floor.
And I think a lot of the best agents that both of us deal with don't shy away from having that difficult discussion with the buyer, but importantly, don't shy away from the buyer at all. I think it's really important that they're 50% of our transaction. Unless we understand that a majority of our buyers, depending on your marketplace, have never been to an auction before. So let's stop assuming that they understand everything that is going to be ahead of them. And that's why I think some agencies are starting to roll with pre-auction checklists now, something that they can send out to their buying pool to say, if you're willing and able to bid at the auction this Saturday, you need to ensure that X, Y, and Z are, X, Y, and Z are all complete. And I think, pre-auction checklists are a really, really good thing to also garnish good quality interest as well. So when you're talking to a buyer prior to an auction, let's have an example here whereby we've got three interested parties. One of those is relatively soft. Two of those are relatively good. The quote range is 1.3 to 1.4. And you've got a buyer who has turned up or potentially prior to auction day that you think might be either your best buyer or one of your best. And you want to try and get them to give you an opening offer on auction day. How does that conversation go?
Well, so that conversation could be had either by the auctioneer or by the agent. I think it's important to state. It's probably easier if the agent has it because, they're probably going to know the buyer. But, I would be approaching the buyer. I'd start off with some basic questions. Have you bid at auction before? Do you understand the process, et cetera, Just, get them to kind of, start a rapport with you. Do you have any questions? Can I help you with anything? So they get the sense that you're helping them out. At some point, I'd be asking them questions like, if I call for an opening bid at such and such a level, would you feel comfortable getting me started today? It's a really direct question, but they're going to give you one of three answers. They're either going to say, oh, no, we'll wait and see what happens, In which case you go, well, if everyone wait and see what happens, nobody's going to bid. Somebody needs to start.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly
They may say, no, we're not bidding first, which is obviously a really clear indication. Or they may just say, and I often find people are like, oh yeah, I'll start you away. You know, just in the moment of being asked the question, would you start me at this level?
Yeah.
You know, if it's a no-brainer at the level that you're asking, which is usually is, we start auctions, you know, lower than where we expect to finish. So you've got a guide of 1.6 and a reserve of 1.7. You go to a buyer and say, look, I thought I might kick the bidding off at 1.5. How would you feel about giving me an opening bid? A lot of people say, yeah, sure, I'll do that.
And more importantly, to preface that by saying, would you be happy if you bought this property today at $1,500,000? I can guarantee the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Then, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, don't hesitate to pop $1.5 million on the table.
Yeah.
And worst case scenario, you win the first chance to have a chat to us straight after the auction as well.
Yeah.
So I think too often people seem to have this idea that their opening bid's got to be their best offer. It's far from the case. Now, sometimes we'll be a bit more bullish in our expectation, but that's normally because instructed so, right?
But that would also be part of my dialogue as the auctioneer, is I would stand up there and say, opening bid or offer buyers, doesn't have to be your best bid, just wherever you feel comfortable to get us started today.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they're not going to give you their best bid first up, and that's the reality. But nor do we want them to, because we actually want to engage multiple bidders and get that competitive bidding happening. So we want to encourage them in at a level at which they are comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think if you've had that conversation beforehand, you know, even if I then call for an opening bid and he doesn't put up his hand, at that point I can just say, sir, would you get me underway at 1.5? And he knows he's already agreed to do it. Mm-hmm. So he's like, oh, yeah, okay, 1.5, and we started away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the reason that Clarence and I are talking about opening bids for so much time is for one single reason. I personally believe that this is the most difficult part of our auction.
And
once we've got that start, then we've got somebody to work with. We've got a game to play then. And importantly, that our dialogue as auctioneers changes from, you know, if you are now interested in purchasing this property, you're going to have to compete, because the party on the right-hand side is now holding the bid, and they're going to have the best opportunity to buy this property. So getting that first offer on the table is quite often the most difficult part of it. And if we can get it over the line and somehow pre-organise prior to the auction, then you've done well indeed.
I think just on that,
yeah.
I mean, it's also quite powerful for the agent's brand, because it avoids that whole awkward moment at the start of an auction, which invariably happens, where we say, we call for an opening bid, and then everyone stands there and stares at us, and there's 15 seconds of silence, and then we make a few more comments, and we chat, and then it all drags out. It's just a kind of an awkward start to the auction. So I just think, like, the most powerful start from an agent perspective, and certainly from an auctioneer perspective, is that a hand goes straight up.
Yep.
Like, how much more confidence do you need in bidding bidding for the property than someone's hand went straight up when we called for an opening bid, or at least very, very promptly? So I mean, that's the power of it for that process.
And I think don't be afraid to take a buyer, to call a buyer up prior to the auction and say, Mr. White, I've noticed that you've got some good quality interest in this property. Have you got 5 or 10 minutes sometime this week for me to come out and take you out to a coffee and give you a couple of hints on how best to purchase this property on Saturday?
Yeah.
Not many people are going to say no to free hints. I don't think. I mean, there is going to be people who will put up their wall, and so be it. Choose your next party. And I think the other thing is to choose that start very cleverly. You know, your educated investor is typically either going to hit it hard themselves or stay well and truly away from it. So pick the best one that you think is going to give you the best result in the end. And the other thing I wanted to mention as well, it was around open and closed questions. I think leading into your auction, it's always about opening a discussion with all of your buyers. So it's about talking to them and finding out exactly what it is that they wish to achieve, why they want to achieve it, what sort of value they've got to achieve it, how big's their family, why are these schools perfect for them. But on auction day, it is, in my opinion, it completely changes. It turns to closed questions. So it's, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, are you willing to give me an opening bid or offer? Yes or no? Mr. and Mrs. Jones, are you able to increase your offer by $50,000? Yes or no? On the auction floor is not the time to be opening up a discussion and having a chat about whether or not their child will make the school down the road. That should have all been done prior to auction day. Now, that's going to bring me to a point that you and I discuss a lot. One of the major frustrations we have at an auction is when somebody, namely an agent, to be quite frank, we're bidding away, it's 1,350,000, 1,400,000, 450,000, 1,500,000, and then an agent steps in and decides that that's the best time to have a chat. Unfortunately, I think with the greatest of respect to all of our agents, it's really important that you allow the momentum to continue. If an auction is flowing beautifully, don't get in the way of it. Don't stand in front of a buyer and think that that's a good time for a conversation. Your time to talk to that buyer is when things stop. Other than that, let the auctioneer do his job. Because I think sometimes I've seen the momentum halted when I felt I had complete control over an auction and where I wanted it to head.
Yeah, if it's not broken, don't fix it. The rule of thumb is if bidding is happening, just let the auction keep going.
Yeah.
Let that momentum flow.
Absolutely. Moving forward, having a bit of a chat to the vendor, which is always really important. One of the first points
before we jump to the vendor,
not a problem.
Can we talk about the one bidder situation?
Because of course.
That's something that's pretty prevalent at the moment, and I think that one bidder scenario is a really important scenario to have a conversation with the buyer.
Yep.
So again, this could be the agent, it could be the auctioneer, depending on whatever the situation is. But I think for me, my preference is, and we're doing a lot of one bidder auctions at the moment. I don't know what you're finding, Jesse, but I'm finding the sell prior rate is quite high. But out of the ones that are actually making it to auction, there's a reasonable percentage of them that we're working with either one bidder or one strong bidder and a soft bidder that's really not doing much, which is effectively one bidder auction.
Yeah.
So for me, being able to go over to that bidder before the auction, introduce myself, hi, I'm Clarence, I'm the auctioneer. If you've got questions, can I help you with anything, blah, blah, blah. But then we get to the point, and the agent may want to have this conversation, or you may want to have it together, but to say to that buyer, listen, it's a good opportunity for you today. You're going to be the only registration and the only person bidding here today. So that's a really good opportunity for you to purchase it without competition. But I think you need to underline a couple of points in that conversation. The first thing is that given that you're the only bidder, you're not bidding against competition, you're bidding against the owner's expectations. The owner's got a reserve price, they've got a minimum price that they're going to sell it for. We understand that you want to buy it as well as you want it, as well as you can, and we, of course, the vendors want to sell it as well as you can. But I'd be underlining that there's absolutely no point putting a silly low bid in to start, because that will be the temptation for the solo bidder is to go, well, I'm just going to throw a low bid in. I think if you say to them, look, there'd be no point wasting time with a low bid because all you're giving us the option to do is place a vendor bid back against you at that point because you're not bidding against anyone else. So you need to put your best foot forward. You need to put your best offer on the table and let's just make it an expedient process and underline the fact that the sellers are here to sell. They want to sell the property. You want to buy the property. We're here to help you buy that property. So just put your best foot forward and we'd like to give you the opportunity and the help to buy the property under auction conditions over the hammer. So I think encouraging them to put their best foot forward rather than mucking around with a low bid is really important. Making them aware that they're the only bidder is really important too because it starts a transparent dialogue. I'm not 100% comfortable with auctions where there's only one bidder. Maybe there's 50 people in the crowd, but it's going to become apparent very, very quickly if they're the only person bidding. They're going to work out somewhere along that process, hang on, I'm either the only person owning a bidding card or I'm the only person willing to put it up. And I just think at that point, they start to feel like there's a game being played with them if you haven't said to them, hey, listen, you're the only registration today.
Yep.
But if you deal with them transparently, I think you increase dramatically your odds of them just working with you then and increasing their bid potentially, which they'll invariably have to do. They'll say you've got a reserve of 1.4 and they offer 1.3 as an opening bid. You're going to get the going and talking to them, either as the agent or as the auctioneer and saying, look, you need to increase that bid. We can't sell it to you at that level. And if you haven't got a rapport going, if they're not trusting you and they're not happy to work with you, then, you're unlikely to get what you want from them at that point. But if you're transparent, you'll start that.
And I think your point is so incredibly valid. It's about taking that first step to building trust with that party. And I think how much more honest can we be as agents to walk over to a buyer and say to them, look, John, this is your lucky day. Yeah. For whatever another reason, you're the only party that's willing to bid today. But I think another thing that a buyer wants to know, and I think every buyer wants to know this, whilst I think educated buyers are different because we will have done our due diligence, but no buyer wants to know that they're the only one that likes a property. And I think that's a really important point. So if there is conditional interest that couldn't bid on that auction on that day, I'm not saying lie to people, but if there is conditional interest and parties were unable to attend for finance or for whatever the reason, I think it's really important that you also you speak about that with the party as well. So you might notify them, look, John, this is your lucky day. We've got one or two parties who just weren't able to bid at auction today. But the good thing is, and going back to Clarence's point, we've got an owner here today who wants to sell this property under auction conditions. They've given me a realistic reserve price. And if you're willing to work with us, we should be able to achieve a sale with no issues whatsoever.
Yeah. I think there's a question that comes on the back of that as well, which is great to ask, which is, do you feel comfortable working with us on the auction floor in order to get the property sold to you today? Because you're going to get a really strong indication straight back. They're either going to go, oh, no, we unlike agents, we'll just talk to you afterwards. You're going to get that, which gives you a really strong indication that they're not going to play ball.
And the reason that's such a beautiful question is it's yes or no.
Yeah.
There's not, well, I'm not really, are you going to work with us or not? And I think at that stage, it means as us as the auctioneer will also probably expect what's going to happen out there a little bit better after we've received that answer, because it means that we can run things a little more differently to probably better the agent's reputation on what sometimes can be a difficult option.
Yeah. I think it's important to know if you've got a truculent buyer who really doesn't want to engage with the agent or the auctioneer, particularly the only bidder. You want to know that in advance so that you can frame that strategy and work out what you're going to do. Could be placing a vendor, or could be keeping it short and sharp so that you don't get into too much back and forth with them. But if it's a buyer that's likely to work with you, then you leave it a little bit more open and you allow those on-floor conversations to take place and get those increased bids, and there's a good chance you sell it under the hammer.
One quick question about, and I'll be interested to hear your answer on this. If for agents who are looking to sell a property, and there might be various requests in a contract, 5%, an extended settlement to 12 weeks, all those sorts of things. Can we just touch on why, from time to time at the pointy end of an auction, it doesn't hurt to ensure that all players are playing on the same field in terms of their terms and conditions, or their settlements and their deposits and all those sorts of things?
So what do you mean in that regard?
So let's just say that there's a party who's currently bidding at $1,500,000, but they're out. They're bidding on a 10% deposit. But there's a party who's just increased the offer to $1,510,000, but they're on a 5% deposit and an 8-week settlement.
Yeah.
Now, at that point of the game, I think it's really important to have a chat to your owner and say, look, would you be willing to go out and speak to that underbidder and confirm with them that they can also have an 8-week settlement, and they can also have a 5% deposit if they wish, to see if you can get a little bit more money?
Everything's on the table. Everything's leverage at that point. If offering them the same terms, the 5% deposit or a different settlement terms is going to cause an increased bid with your vendor's permission. I think that's important, because it's always at the vendor's discretion. But I think some people get in their heads about that too. They're like, oh no, the contract says this, the contract says that. You can vary the settlement date. You can vary the amount of the deposit with your vendor's instructions and with their approval at any time. Simply change it on the front of the contract.
Exactly.
So yeah, of course, those things are negotiable items and can be used to extract that bid.
Yeah, and try with your own with dealing with your buyers' inquiries during a campaign. Try as much as possible to educate your owners as to what are the norms now. It is normal to have a 5% deposit requested, so have a 5% deposit clause ready to go in the contract if they do have it requested. Extended settlements. Make sure that these things aren't surprises to your owners when they request, because the reality is they're on. In fact, I don't think I've really done an auction, or at least 90% of the last 12 months have all had some form of requested change.
Yeah. The other one's, can I pay by direct deposit? I don't have a checkbook. Nobody has a checkbook in there. So, again, and I think people get in their head about this as well. There's no legal requirement for us to take consideration. We actually don't physically have to take a deposit. If the vendor says to us, no deposit, then that would be fine. I would always take a deposit. But
is that so? I disagree with that.
No, that's true. The contract is still enforceable even without a deposit having been placed. All the deposit is consideration. Yeah, so it's security. I've got money, strictly speaking, in my hand. But so that is absolutely at the vendor's discretion. But I think people also, get nervous around electronic transfers. What if it doesn't work? What if it bounces? That kind of thing. You need to understand the contract is still good. If you've sold a property under the hammer and they have signed that contract, the taking of the deposit is entirely at the vendor's discretion and doesn't change the validity of the contract.
Anyway, Fair enough. All right, well, let's move forward now, if we can, and have a little bit of a chat about the pre-auction discussions that you're going to have with a vendor. The first point I want to make about this, and I think this is a really important one, is that any of the good agents I work with, I find that when their owner turns up to the auction, there's absolutely no surprises. They expected everything that happened that day to happen, unless it's a positive surprise that they had a reserve of 2.5 and it sold for 3. I rarely find the clients that I'm dealing with now are turning up and having to notify the owners that we were expecting 6 and nobody turned up. So I think it's really important that no matter what the result is, that the owner turns up on the day, whether or not it's been floated with them earlier on that the auction might be difficult or that it's going to be a cracking auction. I think it's really important that they understand the previous 3, 4, 5 and 6 days when you're doing all your callbacks, where they're sitting at the moment. But let's have a chat about what you talked to the owner about in relation to, well, where do you want to start? One bidders or multiple registered?
Oh, well, multiple's the easiest one.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're having a pre-auction conversation, and again, this could be the same whether you're the auctioneer or whether you're the agent. You might be saying, Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, it's a great situation today. The campaign's brought, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, number of buyers to the property. They're here to own it, which is great news for you. The simple job now is for us to take as much money from the floor as we can and put it in your pocket. So, it's a reassurance that they're about to find out the best price that's available for their property, and underlining that we're going to be doing everything we can to push that process as far as we possibly can. I mean, I think in the multiple registration situation, there's not that much to discuss with the vendor unless the expectations are too high. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Provided the reserve is in line with the quote and in line with the market feedback, then at that point it's just sit tight, let us do our jobs. We're gonna be doing everything we can for you. That's a very straightforward conversation, I think.
Yep. And explain to the owner how the auction process works. I was doing an auction out the other day in Granville. We got the record, funnily enough, which wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was still a record. Yeah. And we were threatening, or I was threatening to sell this thing at about 1.6, something like that, I think. Yeah. And as I threatened to sell it, he was just a nervous bloke. Yeah. And he had no idea, and I completely bluffed him, and he thought I was going to sell it.
Is this the buyer or the vendor?
This is the owner.
Yeah.
And in the middle of the auction, I said, first, second, third. He said, no, stop. I said, no, and I had to quieten him down very quickly to let me do my job. But
that's all good.
Yeah, okay. And make sure that your owners understand what the process is, and look, all good auctioneers, and look, I'm very lucky that I think I know and associated with some incredibly good auctioneers that we all seem to run our businesses in a very, very similar manner. And I think a majority of the auctioneers that I work with and that I deal with will always, nothing will happen unless their owner tells them or their agent tells them that it's okay to go. So make sure that is broadcast across to your owners, because we don't want little things like that happening. And look, to be honest, I've seen it happen multiple times with us. So it's just a matter of making sure that they understand it.
So that's part of the conversation too, isn't it? Saying, look, I'm here to advise you on your best steps today, but at the end of the day, all of the decisions rest with you.
Yeah.
We're not going to sell the property until you're satisfied for us to sell the property. We won't place a vendor unless you give me approval to place a vendor. Just stuff like that empowers the vendor and makes them understand that it's their decision. Also, statements like, we're not here to pressure you to sell it today. Our job is to get the best possible price from the auction floor. It's going to be your decision whether you choose to sell it at the end of that auction. And I think those things just allow people to relax and go, okay, I'm actually in control. I'm not kind of losing control to my agent.
Mm. Yeah, which nobody wants to do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, just before we move on to one bidders and that discussion with the owners, let's talk about how some of our agents watching today can deal with that awful, gut-wrenching situation when you turn up on auction day. You've been quoting 1.4 to 1.5. The owner's been indicating a reserve will be 1.5, and suddenly you get a reserve of 1.6.
Yeah, okay. So a gap in expectations. So look, I certainly as an auctioneer, I would always address that, and I'd address it softly initially as a setup for a more assertive conversation, if and when we fell short of the expectation. So, I guess I'd be saying, look, Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, we've got one bidder here today, or we've got multiple bidders here today. This is your best opportunity to sell the property. What concerns me, and I emphasise the positive first. So say it's a good opportunity to sell your house here today. The good news is people are here to buy it. The challenge from my point of view is that there's a bit of a gap between the indications of what the buyers are saying that they're going to pay and what your expectations are. I'd preface that also by saying, look, we know that buyers are not always honest about what they're willing to spend, so it doesn't change the fact that our job here today is to go out there and get the best possible price from the auction floor. But I'd just like you to have a little think what you'd like to do if the bidding falls short of where your expectations are today, so that you don't get caught in an awkward moment at the end of this auction. I just want you to have a little conversation between yourselves now about that and have a think what you'd like to do. And I'd leave it at that. Like, some people will have a harder conversation. I like a soft conversation to start off with. Leave it with them. You're not forcing them. You're not pushing them, but you're setting it up and just putting it in their brain and having them go, okay, all right, what they're telling us is that it may not or is unlikely to reach what we're thinking it's going to.
Mm-hmm.
And at least then when you come to them later in the auction, you'd say, look, the bidding stopped at 1.45, the reserve is 1.6. We suggested that this might happen because this has been the feedback from the buyers all the way along. What would you like to do at this point? Then they're more ready for that kind of more direct conversation that you need to have at that point.
Yeah. I agree with Clarence on that one too. I do much the same thing when you're in that discussion. I often say much the same thing. Look, I think it is important that you have a figure at which you're willing to sell at today, which is below that price which you've given to me. But importantly, I don't need to know that. The only figure that we're going to focus on is the figure that you've given us, and we will continue to try and exceed that. But in the event that we don't, I need you to be able and willing to make a decision, and make a decision with a little bit of haste as well. That's the big one.
I take it. I completely try to separate my job from expectations and from indications.
Yes.
So my job as an auctioneer, buyer indications are relevant only as information to me, and vendor expectations are only relevant as information to me. They don't change my job. My job is to get the best possible price, the most possible money from those bidders on the auction floor. What the vendor then chooses to do with that is absolutely their decision. Yeah, so I guess sort of separating it and saying, look, our job doesn't change. We're going to be doing everything we can regardless of those things, but we're also aware that indications are here and expectations are here. And so we need to find a realistic point at which this is likely to sell today.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. One bidder auctions, having a chat to the owner. What are some of the things? I mean, because again, going back to my point at the start, the owner should know if one person arrives, but every now and then we get these situations where we're expecting two and only one turns up. Happened to me last night. So
a bit at the moment.
It happens a lot. And I think don't be too disheartened by it, but I think a lot of the time it's about portraying a positive attitude as well. You know, I don't think the best thing to do is to walk into that room with your owner. When one person's turned up, you're expecting two, possibly three. Don't walk in there with your shoulders slumped and your head down and really cranky about the situation. Mr. and Mrs. Owner, the fantastic news is that the Joneses are here, the ones that we expected to come along. Unfortunately, the Josephs couldn't make it for whatever another reason, but the Joneses are here and willing and able to do business under the hammer here today. Do you agree? You know, I think that positive attitude is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I don't know about you, but I'm actually finding that we're getting a lot of one bidder auctions at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, as auctioneers, we're getting really good at them because we're getting a lot of practice, and we're actually selling a lot of them. So I think the first thing is to be positive with your owner and say, look, firstly, reassure them. This is not uncommon at the moment. The market is changing. You know, it's a turning market. We're actually finding a lot of auctions at the moment are ending up with either one or two bidders. But the good news is that we're often able to secure a sale even with one bidder here today. If that bidder's genuine and they're here to buy the home, we can cause that transaction to happen today. So I think staying positive about it. I think you need to preface with them that it's going to be different. You know, the fact that there's only one registration here today means that we're not going to be able to use competitive bidding as leverage to push that price as high as it can possibly be. Our job now is to use a more traditional style of negotiation to get the best possible price out of this process today. And again, underline for them, we're not going to push you to sell it at a level that you're not comfortable with. Our job is to negotiate with that buyer and push them as high as we can, the same way we would if we were doing a private treaty sale. So firstly, to get them to understand that it's normal, it's not unusual. There's nothing wrong with them. It's happening to other people just the same as it's happening to them. But also that there is an opportunity to sell the property, and a good opportunity if that bid is genuine. I would always ask for the opportunity to put that bidder on the floor. I know some agents get a bit scared about putting a one bidder auction on the floor. I say to them, what have you got to lose? Because you stand up, you say, we're not going to run the auction today, we're just going to talk afterwards. You're actually in no worse place at that point if you have run the auction and given them the opportunity to bid on the auction floor. Very often, though, the benefit is that even if you do end up passing it in, you've underlined negotiations by pushing it up to a certain point. And then you've dug your heels in and said, no, we're not selling it at that price. You've really made a strong indication that you're not willing to sell it below a certain price. And then you step into a post-auction negotiation with that already underlined. I think you also show to a marketplace that you're willing to work for, you know, you're willing to work hard for that sale. And if you can get a sale on an auction floor with one bidder, people are impressed, you know, that because that's not the easiest thing to do. So if the agent and the auctioneer work together to get that sale done, and it can be done, you know, I think you end up looking really good and like you worked really hard for your client, which you did. And I think that's a signal to the marketplace. So
I think it shows how genuine your owner is too, doesn't it, right? You know, it shows that your owner says, look, we've only got one here, but mate, I want to sell the property. I don't particularly care that we've got one buyer here. Put it up, let's see how we go. And if they give me a figure that I'm happy with, we're selling it. So from the buyer's perspective, even in an instance where you're sort of quoting 1.4 to 1.550. Even if you get that buyer on the floor and they offer you 1.4, it's a hell of a lot better than not offering it and then having to start from scratch.
Well, it's also a signal to the other people in the crowd, be they neighbours or be they other buyers. But it's a signal to them that there is a buyer.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's evidence, because everybody's cynical when we say, oh look, we've got conditional interest, we're going to step behind closed doors. Everyone goes, they got nothing.
Yeah.
But you have that buyer stand up, put their hand up, even if it's at the guide price. Everyone goes, oh, okay, well, there's a buyer. We know there's a buyer. So,
and the neighbours, I mean, we're all, it doesn't matter what suburb I sell in, everybody's the same. We're all nosy. And when neighbours come along and see that, and they get one auction which stands up and withdraws it, and one person that stands up, gets an offer a little bit below what the neighbours have wanted to be, but nonetheless knows that they've got somebody to negotiate with, straight away walks away and says they've got a shot at that thing.
The other thing, absolutely. And the other thing I would be saying to your vendor is just underlining that this process is going to be a little bit different. Build their expectations about what's about to happen. So, Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, what's going to happen is they're invariably probably going to offer something like this. I'm actually going to now go backwards and forwards between you and them, and we're going to have a negotiation. So there's going to be, just don't expect this to be like a normal auction where people just go bang, 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 bang. This is going to be slower. There's going to be conversations that take place back and forth. The auctioneer is going to stand up. He's going to fill a lot of time with a lot of chat just to, to give us time to have that negotiation. He may participate in it, et cetera, et cetera. So just build that expectation around what's about to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Now, moving forward, I suppose, but also don't forget to ask us any questions, any anecdotes or any issues that you've had that you'd like answered, or potentially we can give you an indication as to how we handle it as well. So please shoot those through. But now we're going to go through very briefly, because we have touched on this in other webinars, but I think it is important in this discussion as to dialogue that we do confirm the discussion that we as the auctioneers need to have with our agents, and some information that we need to garnish off you prior to getting moving. And this discussion is really, it's our game plan. It's our playbook, isn't it? I mean, if it's not done correctly and if we're not given accurate information, it can really make that auction fall flat on its face.
Yep.
And it can be rather embarrassing. Make this very aware, not for anybody else but us, really, if our information is wrong. So I think it's really important that that information is correct. So let's go through, I don't know, there's probably 4 or 5, 6 questions that we ask every agent, and there's a reason behind every single one of them.
Well, we want to know the reserve price, obviously. That's a no-brainer. How many bidders are you expecting? What is the strength of those bidders? What are the price indications from those bidders? Have they made any pre-auction offers? So those are probably the key questions for me.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing I like to ask these days is, where would you like to see the bidding start? Oh, we're on. What is that? Is that Judge Judy?
Oh, I should be doing push-ups or something.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
It's a red card.
Sorry, where were we at?
So pre-auction questions with agents, yeah?
Yeah, I'm also just finding out exactly where the agent believes that property's worth. Quite often to me, I mean, in the commercial world, it's very, very common for me to get a property that's worth 3 to 3.5 with a reserve of 5. And it's for no other reason other than to make that owner feel better about himself. And they will always sell that property at 3.5. It's just the way it is. So I think if we turn up and we just get a reserve price and we get a quote price, but it is important to find out, as Clarence said, as to where those buyers see value, so that we know where to start the auction, that we're not coming in at, say, 1.5, which is probably where just a little bit under where the best buyer is, which means the other 3 never got a chance to compete, and we've wasted everybody's time.
Yeah, so probably the key part of this is getting price indications. I find that a lot of agents are very reluctant to ask hard questions to buyers pre-auction around price, but that's, I don't know, I'd like to see people be courageous in that regard, because if you ask direct questions, no matter how that buyer answers the question, and even if they refuse to answer it, they're telling you something. So you're going to get the information. Say, Mr. Buyer, what do you think it's going to sell for today? Do you think you're going to be the purchaser? Yeah. Where do you see value in the home? Yeah. If bidding gets to XYZ level, will you still be competing for it at that level? Now, even if they sit there and go, we'll see, that's not a no.
No, that's exactly right.
And you're going to work out pretty much from whatever they say at that point, whether it's a yes or a no, or it's a maybe. But if it's a maybe, it means that their price tolerance is not there. If you say, look, if it gets to 1.6 today, will you still be bidding? They say, no bloody way. Well, you know they're out at 1.6 or before that.
Yeah.
You might ask them, well, if it gets to 1.5, will you still be bidding? Oh, well, we'll see. Yeah. So no matter what they give you, they're going to give you an answer. And I don't think those questions are hard. I guess I just feel like people are a bit reluctant to ask them, and I don't, they want to maintain a relationship. I'm not really sure. But that information is so valuable for us as auctioneers because we can then build a strategy around what we know about the buyer intentions and about their price indications. If we know we've got buyer indications here and vendor reserve here, we're running a different auction day strategy to if we've got, expectations here and buyer indications around the same level.
Yeah, and not living in false hope as well. I think too often, Clarence and I talked about this on the phone. Are you interested in this property? Yeah, I love it. Is it as big as what you want to live in? Yeah, it definitely is. It is in the location. Is it near the schools that Yeah, it is. Have you got any money? Or are you willing to purchase? Are you willing to register? Are you interested in actually purchasing this property? Because too often I find at the moment, I've got a property for going to auction tomorrow. We've given out 30, not we, it's had nothing to do with that. The agent's given out 30 contracts and we've got probably 3 people that are going to turn up to it. I think there are serial contract collectors and there are serial little bidding card collectors out there at the moment. So really getting out a contract is only one very, very small factor in terms of determining good quality interest. We've got a question.
Yes, this question is from Sandra. So Sandra says, my attitude is that it only takes one buyer to sell a property. The market dictates what it's worth, not the vendor. How do you stop the purchaser from reducing their pre-auction offer or thinking on price when they realise that they are the only one interested on the day?
It's a good question. Do you want to start or do you want me to?
I don't mind. I'd be having none of it. If somebody's indicated that they're willing to pay a certain amount for the property, there is absolutely no way known to man I would be selling it less than that price on the day, and I'd be making that extremely clear to the buyer. Yeah. And I'd be saying to them, look, you set the owner's expectation. You offered that amount of money. You've set the expectation, so it's only natural that it's there now. And if you think they're going to sell it to you for less than that today just because you're the only buyer that's turned up, I think you're mistaken. You're going to be walking away empty-handed today. And just making that really clear to them. Because the bottom line is we all know they're going to pay it or they're willing to pay it because they've already indicated they will. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know, I think you're letting them off the hook if you let them buy for less.
So do I. And I think that the only time you'd let them buy it for less is in an instance where something has come up that is game-changing. There is substantial termite issue or there is something major construction issue or something like that. That's
so
about the time.
Failure.
Exactly right. It's it's a flood zone and they weren't aware of it or something like that is about the only time that I think you take a haircut on that front. I couldn't agree more, Sandra, that I think that that auctions can be done with one bidder. I mean, I remember when I started my career in late 2008, early 2009, just after the GFC, pretty much everything we did was one bidder auction. So I definitely think they can be done. And I think that in that instance, to try and stop the buyer from reducing their offer, I think you go with exactly what Clarence said, is that you set those expectations and they've sort of made their bed and they've got to sleep in it to a certain degree.
Can I make a point about that? As agents and certainly as auctioneers, we all get caught sometimes in wanting to sell the property desperately on auction day. And sometimes you just need to understand if it's not there, you also need to be willing to stare the buyer down and say, we're willing to pass this in because we think there's a better price.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it?
I was going to make that exact point sort of down towards when we get to auction floor principles, but auction floor conversations. But I think, and we'll get there shortly and we'll probably come back to this as well, but my point was very simple, is that it is sometimes better to pass a property in to try and force a sale for 10 or 20 grand less. I think I've seen it time and time again where an agent says, look, we don't get to let the hammer fall, but I'm going to take this buyer into a room, have a chat to them, twist their arm ever so gently and see if we can't get a deal at a little bit better of a price. And it often gets there. And at the end of the day, the neighbours still walk up and down that street or they drive to the shops the next day and they see the sold sticker on it. They still see the fact that it was sold. I understand the theatre of wanting to do it under the hammer and everybody sees it. I get it. But sometimes it's not the best interest of your client. Let's not forget who we represent in this transaction.
You've got to read the play. You've got to read the play. The danger is, of course, if the buyer is wobbly or if they will walk away potentially. And so it's the job of the agent and the auctioneer to be able to read that and go, okay, this is a slightly insecure sale, we should wrap this up under the hammer, or, it's a judgment call to say, well, we're going to get a better price later.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move forward. We're going to talk about auction floor conversations. So this is always a pretty popular one, I think, in relation to agents questioning us. Obviously, starting things off with an open bid. Now, we've briefly touched on it as well about how you can try and sort of coach an opening bid to come forth, but I think some of the dialogue that we use as auctioneers is typically around the fact that your opening bid, worst case scenario, just gives you the first chance to have a chat to us straight after the auction. Now, in New South Wales, it is not a law for the highest bidder to get the first right to negotiate, just so that you know. It is nothing more than a courtesy. However, I'd love to see it become a law. I really, really would. And I'm not going to have absolutely anything to do with trying to make that happen, but I love the fact that Victoria have it. And I think it's a good thing to reward people who are willing to commit on auction day. So let's have a chat a little bit about opening bids and moving forward to that, how we get people to increase their bids and all those sorts of things.
Well, so if you call for an opening bid, you get no bid. Certainly part of my dialogue at that point would certainly be, to underline it for you buyers, one of two things is going to happen for our highest bidder here today. Either we sell the property to you under the hammer, or we afford our highest bidder the exclusive right to negotiate with us after the auction, and that is to the exclusion of other parties. So if you'd like to be part of that conversation, you need to be in first place wherever we finish today. So just really making it clear to them that it's two opportunities: one, to own it, or two, to negotiate. And that, I guess that sort of, can make them feel comfortable, even if they know they're not at a level where the reserve price is likely to be, to say, okay, well, I'm just going to put my hand up, because at least then I'm the person that they're going to talk to.
Yeah, I agree. One of the big questions, and one of the most common things we see, particularly in this market, is with a one bidder auction, you have a buyer that has popped an offer on the table at $1.3 million. We've been quoting 1.3 to 1.330. Does that allow you to do? I think 1.330, something like that. Yeah, I think it's your max on that. So 1.2 to 1.430. Sorry. The opening bid's 1.3. Now we've got the option there to do a couple of things. To let's just say in this instance, I'll start again. We've got a quote price of 1.3 to 1.430. The property's probably worth 1.4, to be quite honest. We've got one buyer who's willing to start the bidding at 1.3. How do we play that from there? So they've given you an offer of $1.3 million. We've now got a property that's worth 1.4 at least, but only one buyer to deal with. Because I think you've got...
Is this a one-bidder scenario?
One bidder scenario.
It's a one-bidder scenario.
Correct.
Well, I guess there's a number of ways that you could go about it. Certainly I'd be, as the auctioneer, I'd be saying things like, sir, it wouldn't be a surprise to you to know that I don't have authority to sell it to you at that level. But my recommendation to you right now is that you strengthen your grip, put yourself in a position to own it here today in the transparent environment of the auction floor. But it will involve an increased bid and a stronger bid in order to own it here today. So would you like to make an increased offer? Actually invite them to make an increased offer on top of themselves. I think that's really important, because they're not just going to volunteer it, and people feel funny about it. I'd also, if you are able to get them to make that increased offer, I'd be reinforcing, sir, that's a very smart strategy. You're putting yourself in a position to own it in an unconditional environment right here today, and to take it away from your competition, take it away from any conditional interest. Yeah. So, I think that fear of, well, what happens if this auction passes and we haven't bought it? Is somebody going to come in? Is one of the other bidders going to walk away and think, oh, okay, we'll go back to them with $10,000 more and see what happens? So, identifying that it's an opportunity to secure it right here and right now in a transparent environment, and to take it away from any competition that may be working.
And did you notice I think one of the best things that Clarence said there, and it's something that we've integrated into our business as well, is declaring your position to a party, and importantly, just being honest about it. I think too often, 10, 20, 30 years ago, it was this game as to who could not call a property on the market and who had the best ability to convince someone the property's on the market when it's not. I think, that little comment that you made there, sir, it would be no surprise to you that at this sort of level, I'm not going to be selling you the property. Now, the buyers aren't stupid. You've been quoting 1.3 to 1.430. They know for a fact that 1.3 is about as good as it's going to get, and they know that they're not going to sell it. So why sit there and try and pull the wool over their eyes and convince them they're not? Well, I think it's better just to say to that buyer, look, so you're at $1,300,000. I think you're pretty clear that we can't sell it to you at that sort of figure, but we've got a little bit of a gap to bridge, and I'm sure that we can do it here under auction conditions. Bear with me. We'll have the agent across to negotiate with you. And I think educating and talking to people in the crowd as to what's happening at that time. And again, from an agent's perspective, if the agent's doing the rounds and has a bit of a congregation of neighbours on the corner, walk over and let those neighbours know. Just while everyone's making a decision, guys, we're just negotiating it. This is where we're at. We've got a party here at 1.3. The owner's a little bit better than that, but we're just trying to bridge that gap and get it done under auction conditions.
Well, look, so if that's a one-bidder scenario, obviously that pre-auction conversation becomes really important at this point, because their willingness to increase their bid, really relates strongly to that pre-auction conversation. But say you've got multiple bidders in this scenario, but you've got one bidder that's clearly your strongest bidder, nobody else is willing to put up their hands,
Mhm.
and you're trying to work with that highest bidder at that point, I'd be going over to them either as the auctioneer, I could say it on the floor, or as the agent and say, look, it's not going to sell at this level, to be clear, but what I don't want the situation for you to get into is that we pass it in here and you give all of these other guys who've been bidding here so far the opportunity to go away and have a little bit of a think about it. You can take it away from them and get it secured right here and now by increasing your bid by whatever you want to ask for, 20, 50 or whatever.
Correct.
You could also be dialogue by, like, look, at this level, there's just no way the owners are going to sell it, but if you give me another 20, you give me another 50, you actually put yourself in a position where they may have a decision to make. So I'd like you to give them an opportunity to make a decision on the offer that you've offered, rather than being at a level where it's obvious that we're going to pass the property in if we don't get an increased bid. So you sort of just encourage them to be at a place where they can cause a transaction to take place. And also you can be working on that fear of loss a little bit in terms of what happens, because people do that, don't they? They refuse to bid on the auction floor, but then they'll come back afterwards and say, oh, I'll give you another 10. How about that? And it may be the underbidder, and that gets
I had an
awkward
auction
for the
last
highest
night.
bidder.
I could not, for the life of me, get a starting bid on it. I was asking for $2.7 million. They wouldn't give it to us. Sure enough, we passed the property aside. Not 1.5 minutes later, the buyer at the back of the room had already walked up to the agent and offered him 2.8.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and some people just don't generally like to do it under the hammer, and that's fine. So you've just got to try and work with them. I think the other option in this sort of scenario that we're talking about is exercising a vendor bid at a strategic position as well. I did an auction yesterday as well, except this one was on site, so a commercial property down in Ingleburn, I think it was. It was the auction got moving. I think we started at about 1.1, I think, or $1 million. We ended up to about 1.3. Now the bidding stopped at 1.3. The highest bidder had made it very clear that they weren't going 1 penny more, and the underbidder had been out since about 1.275, and indicated very much that he was well and truly done. The owner said to me, look, with some comparable sales, the agent agreed with it. With some comparable sales, this thing's got to be worth 1.350. Might have been 2.350. I can't remember. But worth 1.350. As a result, could you please do me a favour and exercise a vendor bid? I said, look, you're taking a risk, but I said, if everybody's comfortable with the risk, I'll take it. Sure enough, I exercised the bid at, let's call it 1.350. Within about 35 seconds, the underbidder made an offer of 1.351 and we sold it. So, sometimes a strategic vendor bid can ensure that you'll get it there. But in the same sentence, and this is only going to confuse people, it can also ruin everything that you've done over the last 4 weeks.
So rocks or diamonds play.
Exactly right. Rocks or diamonds play. I don't think there's a better word for it or a better sentence for it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how those strategic plays can make a difference, and sometimes they can shoot you in the foot heavily.
There's another little bit of dialogue for getting people to increase on top of themselves that I think is delicate for agents. And I love to see an agent who's courageous enough to go up to a highest bidder even when we're above the reserve and ask for an increased bid.
Yeah.
And I think there's a really important thing about this. And I am never an advocate for lying to buyers, so I would never go to a buyer and say we're still below the reserve price. I think you need to be very, very careful about that. But what I would do, if you sense that bidder's not done, you've exhausted the underbidders, you're above the reserve, but that person's not hesitated. They've just gone bang, 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 bang. They're showing strong signs of still having money in them. Then I love an agent to be able to go up to them and say, look, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, we're so close right now. The owners are hoping for a little bit more. Could you just extend your bid by another 10, 20, 30, whatever it is? I'd love to get this on the market and get it sold to you here today. Now, if you can do that, you're an absolute hero to the crowd. You're a hero to the vendor because they know that you're above their reserve price and you just got them an extra 20, 30. You basically paid your fee in a lot of instances just by asking a question and by being able to read the play. At the end of the day, that's what we get paid more than anything else to do, is to read the play in front of us, to get the most money. But we've got to read when that buyer is at their maximum stress point and they won't pay anymore. And if they're not there, we shouldn't be calling the property on the market. We shouldn't be selling it to them if we don't think we've got that best price from them. That's my personal.
No, I agree, and I want you to think about the barbecue, and I use the barbecue analogy quite a lot in real estate. But let's just think about a bunch of people at a barbecue, and an owner had an auction experience whereby they told them that they were willing to accept $1,340,000. They went out and they sold the property at $1,340,000. They get to that barbecue and they say, look, we wanted $1,350,000, we got to $1,340,000, we were relatively happy. The same situation where a buyer, they accepted the $1,340,000 offer. The agent then goes out and gets another 20 using the dialogue that you've just used. that person at the barbecue has a completely different scope. You know what? We accepted $1,340,000 and our agent wasn't done. He went out, he spent another 3 minutes, and he got an increased offer from the highest bidder of $20,000. Now, to the agent, that equates to about $250. It means nothing. But to the owner, as you say, that's paid their marketing. It's changed the scope of what they can do in the years to come.
And the key part of that phrase to the buyer is our owner's hoping for a little bit more. This is where agents get tripped up, you know, talking about what the reserve price is, or we can't sell it to you at that level, or the reserve's higher than it. You don't have to say that. Use a soft phrase like the owner's hoping for a little bit more. And it's true. Of course they're hoping for a little bit more. They're always hoping for a little bit more. And they say, well, what's the reserve? You say, look, I'm not going to disclose the reserve today, but obviously our owners are hoping for and expecting a little bit more than that. And so you've actually completely sidestepped the need to deal with whether we're above the reserve or below the reserve just by having a soft phrase, but you're giving them an opportunity.
Question time.
Okay, another question comes from Melanie. Melanie asks, what tips do you have for the conversation with the highest bidder after the property has been passed in? How do you start it, and what should you aim for in that chat?
Do you reckon we can table that and get through our auction floor stuff? I touch on it at the end.
Yeah, it's a good question. And funnily enough, I'm actually looking at the answer to that question at the bottom of the page. So if you could just bear with us, Melanie, I'm so sorry. And we'll come back to you on that because it's a very, very good question. And it sort of comes down to the negotiation principles, I think partly, and we won't give it away too soon. The next question we're just going to talk about in relation to auction floor, we've only got 10 minutes left, so we'll keep this rolling along, is the question that we get asked more than anything, is it on the market? Again, I go back to the point where please stop denying the fact that things are on the market or they're off the market. I understand that to a certain degree it is a negotiation, it is a little bit of a game, but at the end of the day, it is much better just to be honest with people rather than try and pull the wool over their eyes and lie to them about where you're at and what position you're in, I think, at the time. When we're asked consistently if a property is on the market, we haven't reached it, we'll answer in all sorts of ways. Give us a couple of ways.
Okay, my usual way is, sir, to be clear, I'm not going to disclose the owner's reserve here today, and we're under no obligation to do so. All I'm going to do is call it up once, twice, 3 times and sell the property, but I will make it clear to you before I sell it. How about that?
Yep, exactly right. Exactly. Something as simple as that, or ladies and gentlemen, or sir to you, I can declare that we're not quite there at the moment, but you're currently holding the bid at $1,450,000, and at the moment you've got the best opportunity of purchasing this property today. Now, I think that question, or the question as to whether or not the property is on the market, and again, we've already mentioned this in a few webinars prior to, but the questions that are asked of you on auction day, it's really important that you answer them in the regard of which they are asked. If it is asked from you, from a lovely young couple, about 24, 25 to 30 years old, who are nervous and evidently shaking down at the thing, and they've asked you if it's on the market, don't snap back at them. Don't be rude to them. Understand and be empathetic of their position. But if the questions come from somebody who's a little bit more educated and is asking it purely to have a crack, then you answer in a little bit of a different tone.
Well, so it's yes, no, we're not giving you the information. If it's yes, it's if it's yes, we're on the market, it can be a simple yes, sir, we're selling it today. Yeah. If you want to give that. If it's a no, it could be, sir, not quite yet, but we've got a little bit of work to do. But the only way to get it on the market today is to bid again. Could I put you in front with an increased bid to blah blah blah?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's always positive. It's always smiles. It's got to be smiles. And I think that we can't say enough how important it is that as you're making your way around the auction floor, that you're always upbeat, that you're confident, and whatever the result is on that day. I mean, I think sort of diverging a little bit, but I think any good auctioneer is good purely on their ability to make it look like whatever happened, they expected to happen, and playing what's in front of them really, really well.
For me personally, I always just say, look, sir, we're under no obligation to disclose the owner's reserve, and we're not going to do that today. I'm not going to say the words on the market. You just need to be in front when we sell it, sir. Could I put you back in front with an increased bid? Just take the conversation away from them. You're just really clear that we're not, I don't use the phrase. I don't like it. I think it's awful. I don't call properties on the market, and if somebody asks me, I'll just tell them that I'm not going to tell them.
And on this forum, it's a good opportunity for us to say, stop using it. Yes, the property will be sold. I mean, my boss says, I quit calling my boss, but David always says when people walk in and they say, it's on the market, he goes, I know it's on the market, but can I sell it?
Please, agents, don't walk out of the vendor conversation and stand in the middle of the auction floor and say, it's on the market, and like loud so everyone can hear it. just whisper it in our ear, give us the opportunity to strategically use that at the time when it's best. Best useful.
All right, we're going to move forward. We're not going to forget that question. So the next thing for us is auction 4 negotiation principles. So some things that we think are really, really important for you to understand. So you've written these down, Clarence. So I think I want you to go through them, but hit them off.
Well, I think the first one for me is always ask for more than you want, and this is specific probably to the agent buyer conversation
as well.
More so than the auctioneer. Well, I'm talking about the private conversation that takes place between the agent and the buyer. Say we're at the bids at 1.3 and the owner is at reserve. Let's say the reserve is 1.35 and the bid's at 1.3. Now, what most agents will do is go up to that buyer and show them the reserve, or say the reserve's 1.35. The minute you tell them the reserve is 1.35, you're not getting 1.35, because buyers want to have a win. No matter what you tell them, they want to pay less. So you have to ask for more than you want. Yeah, look, the owner's looking for something in the high 1.3s. Could we increase your bid to 1.35, saying give yourself an opportunity to own it today? So you're asking for a bid at the reserve price, but you're asking for more than you want. Yeah. So you go back to that buyer and they've given you a little bit of something. Maybe you've already had the conversation with the vendor that says, look, we'll sell it at 1.325. Go back to that bidder and say, look, could I get you to 1.35? I think we can probably get them across the line at 1.35. And they go, well, no, I'll give you 1.330. And you've already pre-framed that, yeah? But if you ask for what you want, you won't get it.
1.330 was all he wanted in the first place.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the end result. It's shooting for more to get to halfway there, and then everybody feels like they're having a win. And I think Clarence's point there is so important, is that we want everybody walking away from our auctions feeling like they're having a win. That's why I don't like calling the properties on the market, because no buyer wants to know that at 1,250 they could have bought that property if they bought it prior. And now we're at 1,500,000. They're now paid 250,000 more than the agent and the owner thought it was worth. No buyer wants to hear that. So it's important that we frame that correctly. Yeah. Next one.
So the reserve price, showing the reserve price or talking about the reserve price. This is a big one, because a lot of agents like to use the reserve price as part of their negotiation conversations, whether that be actually showing the physical reserve or talking about it. And I think that there's a mistake that's often made here. If the gap between where we are and the reserve is only small, don't show them the reserve. Because if they think they're that close, they're not moving. You actually kill a negotiation at that point. So if there's only a 20 grand gap between where they are and the reserve, they're like, bugger that. The owner can just come down. We're the highest bidder. Nobody else is willing to bid at that point. So if you're going to disclose the reserve or show someone the reserve, only show them if the gap is significant enough that it's actually going to cause them to try to bridge that gap. Because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get them to bridge the gap. And if the gap's small, they're not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Counter offers.
Counter offers. Yeah. I would never give a counter offer unless they've given an increased offer. So say we got to 1.3 with competitive bidding on the floor, and say we've got a 1.4 reserve. A lot of agents, will go to that bidder and say, could you increase your bid? The reserve is higher, or they might identify the reserve, or whatever dialogue we want to use around the reserve. But then they'll go, that bidder won't give them anything. They'll say, well, no, what would they take? And the agent will go inside and come back and say, look, they'll sell it at 1.375. But I would be saying to them, they're not changing their expectations until you move from where you are. So don't give them a counter offer until they say, all right, well, we'll give you 1.310 or 1.320. Then go into the vendor and say, okay, look, what I'd like to do is come back to them and say that we could sell it today at 1.375. Are you comfortable with that?
And don't rush into the owner. Spend your time with the buyers. I think too often, we get to, 1,290 is a bit 1,290, 1.3, and then it stops at 1.3, and then the agent first thing quickly runs inside. You get around to everybody. Make sure that you have confirmed that when you go into the owner, because in that instance, when you've got a $1.5 million reserve, don't assume that you're going to walk into the owner and he's going to have a big smile on his face, because you're miles away from where you promised him that it would be.
First conversation should always be with the buyer to get an increase.
I agree. Get 3 no's. Talk to me about that concept.
Okay, yeah. So, it's just a little rule of negotiation that I like to have. So, the buyers obviously are often going to say no to you, but I won't assume that that's a real no until they've said no to me 3 times. And this, again, I think is a mistake that's often made. You go to someone, you ask for an increased bid, they're at 1.3, owners at 1.4, and they say, no, we're not increasing our bid. And then again, the agent, runs straight into the vendor and tries to get a discount from the vendor. Yeah, at that point, sure, go do that, but just say, look, I'm coming to talk to you for no apparent reason, really. I'm going to go back and ask for more money. Go back to the buyer again and say, look, their expectations are where they are. we need to get an increased bid in order to own this here today. And they say, no, we just, we're the highest bidder, blah, 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 blah. Get 3 no's before you actually take it as a real no.
Yep.
Because buyers, they want to buy well. They want a discount. They want to win.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you haven't asked them 3 times for me to get a no, then it's not a real no.
Yeah,
or you don't know if it's a real no.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Melanie, your question about post-auction negotiations around the reserve price and negotiating with a party straight after auction. I think it's really important. I think Clarence is right in relation to how far apart you are, but let's say in your instance that you do have a little bit of a gap. I think it's quite important that you declare that reserve price. I think the reserve price form, if you're given the approval to share it, and remember, never ever share it without approval of your owner, but if your owner's given you approval to share it, I always find that showing the party the reserve price and say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, here's the reserve price, will you pay it? And then shut up. That's where it is. Don't continue. It's not too often I hear agents will say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, here's the reserve price. Now I understand it's a little bit above where you wanted, but we're not far away. Your offer's there. Pop the reserve price in front of them and ask them if they'll pay it, yes or no. Now they're absolutely silly if they do, but from time to time it'll happen. But in that instance, I think you're better off trying to start at that level. And they're saying, well, God, no, I won't pay $1,450, but I will pay X amount of dollars. Then you've got a negotiation and a gap in which to bridge from that end. That accompanied with, I think, of course, asking for more than you want. That's the other one, depending on your position there as well. So utilising that little bit of dialogue Clarence gave us about asking for a little bit more, somewhere in the late 1.3s, but let's say 1.350 to close it off today. Those sorts of things will always help as well.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question.
Can I throw something in? A couple of things on that, just to change the mindset for everybody. Your job isn't to get to the reserve price. Your job is to get to the maximum the buyer will pay. Yeah. So regardless of where that reserve price sits, if you think there's more money in, you should be asking for more. So I think we get caught in the paradigm of shooting for the reserve price. But I think the other thing about that is that people get a little bit caught in the headlights again in the fear that that buyer is going to walk away. You've got to remember that the buyer generally, if they're a motivated buyer, they have an equal and opposite fear, the same fear that the vendor has that they won't sell it today. The buyer has the fear that they won't be able to secure it. So if you've actually gone to the stage of passing the property in and then you're trying to get an increase from the buyer, it's really important to them to say, look, there is a level at which the owners just won't sell it today. So I know that you're the only highest, you're the highest bidder, nobody else bid above this, you don't want to pay more than that. But the bottom line is the owner's just not going to sell it at that price. They're prepared to walk away. And I think there's something really powerful about the buyer suddenly understanding that both the agent and the vendor are prepared to not accept and simply let go of that negotiation if there isn't an increased bid, because that's, in the absence of competitive bidding, that's the ultimate leverage that will make the buyer go, damn, I have to. Mm-hmm. I'm actually just not going to be able to buy it if I don't.
Yep. So
this involves a bit of courage, and it involves some bluffing skills, some good poker skills. And remember that if they walk off up the drive, you can always ring them and say, look, the owner's reconsidered, or you can run after them, or you do what you need to do. But it is a game of bluff. It is a staring contest. And so in that post-auction negotiation, to get them to pay more, you have to be saying, we're willing to stare you down.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. I think we've run a little bit over time, as we always do. We're auctioneers, we can talk. Thank you. We've got a fair few more of these to come this year. I don't know how many, 4 or 5, I think. So we'll keep them running throughout the year. Clarence, mate, thank you as always. Lovely to see you. Wonderful to have your knowledge here as always. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the weekend. Stay sunblocked up. I think you'll need it this weekend before it gets cold. See you soon. Thank you. Mentor style.